Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with the latest on trade because there is new uncertainty on that front as traders prepare to return from the holiday shortened trading week. A federal appeals court ruled on Friday that President Trump exceeded his authority by imposing global tariffs through an emergency law. But the court is allowing those levies to stay in place while the case proceeds. It says the statute President Trump used does not explicitly include the power to impose tariffs, duties, or taxes, and that Congress did not delegate tariff power to the president. Bloomberg News contributor Rick Davis says the decision extends the suspense over whether the tariffs will ultimately stand.
He likes to show force, right? And the emergency powers gave him that. But he does have other mechanisms to implement some portion of those tariffs. He might not be able to do all of them with every country that he had under a tariff regime.
Yes, right.
But programs like, Section 301 and others give him the ability alone, the power of the executive branch to implement some of those tariffs.
Bloomberg News contributor Rick Davis tells Bloomberg's Joe Matthew that the Trump administration could potentially turn to the Supreme Court for a final ruling or could let the Court of International Trade revisit the matter.
Even after this ruling, Nathan, President Trump says India has offered to eliminate all its tariffs in response to new U.S. trade penalties. Neither the White House nor Indian officials have confirmed any new trade discussions. But this comes days after the White House imposed 50% levies on Indian goods as punishment for its purchases of Russian oil. President Trump's trade advisor Peter Navarro is once again attacking Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
It was a shame to see Modi getting in bed as the leader of the biggest democracy in the world with the two biggest authoritarian dictators in the world, in Putin and Xi Jinping. That doesn't make any sense.
White House trade advisor Peter Navarro spoke as Modi declared that India and Russia have a special relationship at the start of a bilateral meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in China.
Well, meanwhile, Karen, Bloomberg News has learned that Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, is convening a virtual meeting of BRICS leaders next week to discuss President Trump's trade policies. Sources tell us Lula is aiming to rally support for multilateralism among fellow emerging market nations. The U.S. has imposed varying tariff rates across the BRICS, and Lula reportedly does not want the meeting to turn into an anti-U.S. summit.
Meanwhile, back in Washington, Nathan, Congress is coming back from its summer recess, and the Senate is likely to meet its target to fast-track Stephen Miron's confirmation to the Federal Reserve before its next rate-setting meeting in just over 2 weeks. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has more from Washington.
President Trump appointed Miron to fill the last few months of a term that was unexpectedly vacated by Fed Governor Adriana Kugler. Miron can expect a grilling over Trump's economic policies and efforts to influence the Fed and could face questions from both Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats privately acknowledge they can't block Miron's confirmation on their own, and under the rules, they can only hold it up briefly in the committee, maybe for a few days on the Senate floor. Miron's confirmation hearing is set for Thursday. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Amy, thanks. And before that hearing, current Fed Governor Lisa Cook is still fighting President Trump's bid to oust her. A federal judge spent about 2 hours on Friday questioning lawyers for Cook and the Trump administration on whether the president has cause to fire her over allegations of fraud on her mortgages. The judge ended the hearing without a ruling. Cook's attorneys are expected to file another legal brief today, addressing the judge's questions and the administration's arguments.
Nathan, let's turn to the markets now. In gold, trading at a record, driven by expectations for Fed rate cuts and concerns over central bank independence. The price topped $3,500 an ounce as investors loaded up on the safe haven asset. The latest run comes after Fed Chair Jerome Powell cautiously opened the door to a reduction in his Jackson Hole comments due to a weakening jobs market.
Well, meanwhile, Karen, futures are trading lower with the record-breaking stock rally facing its next test later this week in the August jobs report. Former Kansas City Fed President Esther George says a weak number does raise the chances for a cut.
The economy looks to be performing pretty good. The decision is, do they see something ahead that suggests the economy will slow in a way, the job market will be damaged in a way that requires them to ease policy at a time when inflation is holding in there pretty strong.
Former Kansas City Fed Chief Esther George appeared on Bloomberg Television ahead of this Friday's jobs report.
Nathan, in geopolitics, Russia's Gazprom has signed a legally binding agreement to build the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline to China in what's being seen as a major political win for the Kremlin. Discussions around the mega project have been stalled for years, but Russia has been eager to advance the deal to compensate for lower European deliveries following its invasion of Ukraine. The news comes amid days of meetings at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit.
Also in Asia, Karen, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's key ally, Secretary General Hiroshi Moriyama, intends to resign to take responsibility for an election setback. Ishiba's repeated his intention to stay on despite calls within his party to see him go, and he has apologized for the many seats that his ruling Liberal Democratic Party lost in July.
And just this morning, Nathan, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un arrived in China to attend a military parade in Beijing. It's a rare overseas visit that underscores Kim's ties with President Xi Jinping and Russian leader Vladimir Putin. The visit marks Kim's first trip abroad since he traveled to Russia in 2023 and his first trip to China since January 2019.
And a plane carrying European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was disrupted over the weekend. Karen, authorities think it was Russia interfering in Bulgaria. We get more from Bloomberg's Suzanne Lynch in Brussels.
The plane carrying von der Leyen, which was landing in Bulgaria on Sunday as part of this 4-day tour, did land safely, but it was the subject of GPS jamming. Now, Bulgarian authorities have said that this is the fault of Russia. In fact, a lot of the Baltic countries have reported an increase in this kind of activity.
Bloomberg's Suzanne Lynch says von der Leyen was touring the EU's easternmost states on a campaign to build up military infrastructure.
There's some major corporate news in Europe. Nathan, Nestle has dismissed its CEO, Laurent Frex, after only a year due to an undisclosed workplace affair with a direct subordinate. We get more with Bloomberg's Jennifer Creary.
So we know that there was an internal investigation from the company, and this was after the matter was raised to the company via an internal platform called Speak Up. The company couldn't substantiate the allegations after that, and so they brought in an external counsel to conduct another investigation, and that is the result that we see today.
Bloomberg's Jennifer Creary says Nestle has named Philip Navratil as Frex's replacement. He currently runs Nestle's Nespresso coffee brand. And checking shares of Nestle this morning, they're down more than 1%.
And in more coffee news, Karen, Starbucks says its fall product launch drove a record week of sales. And that, of course, included the return of the pumpkin spiced latte. Starbucks CEO Brian Niccol is leading a turnaround at the U.S. coffee giant that's focused on improving customer service, revamping the menu, and making the stores more welcoming.
It's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. 9 former CDC directors are calling out Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in a collective op-ed. The former CDC directors who served Republican and Democratic administrations from Carter to Trump, writing in a New York Times op-ed that Kennedy has, quote, severely weakened programs designed to protect Americans from cancer, heart attacks, strokes, and more. They argue Kennedy, a longtime vaccine skeptic, has focused on unproven treatments while downplaying vaccines amid the biggest measles outbreak in a generation. At the Labor Day rally in Chicago, officials celebrated the power of organized labor. They also turned their attention to the possibility of National Guard troops patrolling the city to fight crime, as suggested by President Trump. Mayor Brandon Johnson.
This is the city of Chicago, where we have given paid time off for over 1 million workers, 10 days off, the biggest city in America to ever do it. This is the labor movement, you all. Yeah.
Mayor Johnson says President Trump has shifted the largest concentration of wealth into the hands of the few. Meanwhile, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem spoke about immigration enforcement operations in any of the cities beyond Chicago. She told CBS's Face the Nation nothing is off the table.
We have hundreds and hundreds of agreements with local law enforcement, sheriffs, city administrators and mayors across the country that want to solve problems.
CBS's Face the Nation can be heard on Bloomberg Radio. President Donald Trump says he's awarding former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani the Presidential Medal of Freedom, announcing the honor 2 days after his longtime political ally was badly injured in a traffic accident. Giuliani was once lauded for leading New York after the September 11th attacks and later sanctioned by courts and disbarred for amplifying false claims about the 2020 election. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
Thanks, Michael. Time now for our Bloomberg Sports Update, and for that, we bring in John Stashower.
Thanks, Karen. Bill Belichick's college coaching debut did not go well as North Carolina Tar Heels scored a touchdown 4 minutes in. By the time they scored again, TCU was ahead 41-7. The Horned Frogs won in Chapel Hill 48-14. U.S. Open, Coco Gauff lost to the fourth round to Naomi Osaka, a four-time Grand Slam champion. This will be her first quarterfinal since 2021. Quarterfinals begin today. Novak Djokovic plays Taylor Fritz tonight. That's your Bloomberg Sports Update.
Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak coming up after this.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. Wall Street is heading back to a holiday-shortened trading week in a traditionally difficult month for stocks. Already, investors are facing new uncertainty when it comes to President Trump's trade policies. Country-by-country tariffs have been declared illegal in court, though a judge is keeping them in place for now. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel. And here we are, Valerie. Futures pointed lower this morning. Are we already starting to see a market reaction to this new trade uncertainty? Good morning.
Good morning, Nathan. Well, there is some nuance to this story here, one of which being we're looking at the timeline of when this case will now be presented and decided upon by the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court does decide to prioritize this, they could have the case ruling at some time in the beginning of next year. But if they don't, we could be waiting almost a year for a final decision on the Supreme Court. So that maybe has given some relief to market participants. And also, if we look at the vote that was in this appeals court, it was 7-4, which is better than the original case when that was made earlier in terms of the vote split. So the vote split does appear more balanced. So net, if you look through the details, there is, I guess, a bit more solace for markets that this Supreme Court case might not be the final decision. We might not see that final decision for a few months to come.
Although it's interesting, even after this court ruling, we saw this post on social media from President Trump saying that India has offered to cut its tariffs on U.S. goods to zero after the president posted 50% tariffs on India over its purchases of Russian oil. We've got a lot going on in China, meetings between India and Russia there. Is that part of what's going on?
Well, it wasn't clear when exactly this offer from India was made and whether the White House even plans to reopen trade talks with India. But this was Trump posting on social media, maybe perhaps in response to India's Modi meeting China's Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin. There were some images yesterday of all of them holding hands. So perhaps he wanted to make sure that he had his final say when it came to these India tariffs. And they have slapped on 55% charge on Indian exports to the U.S., and that has been on the back of maybe seen as punishment for its purchases of Russian oil. So maybe perhaps this is a way of Trump trying to meangle that three-party handshake that he saw yesterday on social media.
And as if trade uncertainty weren't enough, in our last minute, we've got another major catalyst coming up for markets at the end of the week in the August jobs report. How much is this going to seal in expectations for a rate cut?
Look, it's a big one, especially after Jerome Powell reemphasized how important the labor market data is. This Friday, we have non-farm payrolls. Consensus is for 75K print and for the unemployment rate to tick higher to 4.3%. And with the market already pricing in a 90% chance of that September rate rate cut. A weak print could perhaps have the market pricing in further
This
rate
is
cuts.
Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.